It's a privilege to be here. My talk is the ABCs of crowdfunding your game idea. And I'm going to be speaking, drawing from experience.
Can you keep it close to you?
I'll be drawing from experience of my own experience crowdfunding Regency, which you see right here in front of me. It's in the demo hall. I already had the privilege of sharing it with some of you. But I'm going to be talking about what that was like from concept, the ABCs, to step-by-step. Perhaps I should have called it A to Z, because I'm going to really give a lot of information that's going to move through it as sort of an outline form, taking an idea from raw concept to the actual production of a game, minus the details of fulfillment, manufacturing fulfillment, but the crowdfunding, how to go from concept to funding. My name is James Fazio. The company I represent is called Peak Games. My wife back here, Amy Fazio. We started the company really to launch our own game ideas. We realized that we were full of game ideas. We come from a gaming family. We have 4 children. We're a homeschool family. So we do a lot of hands-on activity with our kids. We favor, at least I favor, we try to impart to our kids to value sitting around a table and interacting more than the screen time that of course, our boy in particular tends to prefer. We like the interactivity and the emotions and the choices and the failures and successes and everything else that playing games around the table, particularly interacting with one another. We value that as a family. So our goal for our first game was to come up with a 6-player game. We're a family of 6. And the age of our kids ranged from 8 to 18. We wanted to keep the 18-year-old engaged. At the same time, we wanted the 8-year-old to be able to play. So that was our concept. Our window of time to do this was during COVID. We had a lot of home time as just family. And so it afforded us a unique opportunity to work together to develop our first game. And during COVID also, because it lasted a lot longer than 2 weeks. So what we did was, I don't remember the 2 weeks flat the curve, right? So what we did was we used that time to take our idea all the way to marketing, to Kickstarter, to not funding on Kickstarter, to relaunching on Kickstarter and funding. And fortunately, just this last month, we had all of our games go out from the fulfillment center. About 90% of our backers have received their games. Some of the ones who live in more remote countries and regions are still awaiting theirs to arrive. But that's where we're at right now in the process. I'd love to share more with you about it in the hall, but I want to begin with what it looks like, what the ABCs are. Last year alone, there were over 6.4 million crowdfunding campaigns that raised more than $17 billion in North America alone. It's a pretty big market. That represents an increase of 33.7% over 2020, which means it's a growing market. In this talk, I'm going to review the best practices for approaching crowdfunding to provide a roadmap for how you can get your game ideas successfully crowdfunded. I'll draw largely from industry best practices in addition to first-hand anecdotal experience as someone who's been through the highs and the lows and learned effective strategies for successfully crowdfunding a campaign on Kickstarter or GameFam. Because I'll be moving very quickly, I don't have a visual, I have a huge list. I have actually 5 pages of outline, and I'm just going to be going through bullet points, but I'm going to be talking about them more. If you are interested in talking about any one of these, because usually people find themselves at one of these stages, and I'm going to walk through all of them. More than happy to talk with you about it, but I can also refer you to some great great sources. This is one. This is, and some of you may be familiar with this. This was put out by Gabe Barrett at the Board Game Design Lab. You may be familiar with that name. He's a Christian game designer and has a very successful podcast, which he just wrapped up. But is still very active in the community. The Board Game Design Lab is a great place on Facebook, to a very friendly place for game designers to interact. Gabe Barrett is a Christian. He just came back to the United States from the mission field in Honduras, where he spent the last several years of his life. And there's a lot of other very accomplished game designers, including Andrew Lowen has contributed to this, and several others. So this is a great resource which really unpacks a lot of what I'm going to be moving through rather rapidly. So I'll have this on my table also. You're more than welcome to just sit down with it, spend time, look at individual parts of what I'm going to be covering. The first step in the A, if you will, the ABCs, is you need to understand going to Kickstarter whether you're going to be kickstarting a game idea, in which case you might want to really consider if this is the right venue for you, or if you're kickstarting a business. In our case, we were kickstarting a business. It's very important because it's an awful lot of work, and you're going to find yourself doing 100 different things. And if a single game is your passion, you probably want to work with somebody else who can help work with you on that idea, to flesh out the idea and to be able to get it to market. But if you have in mind to actually kickstart a game business, then Kickstarter is probably the right place for you to do that. So you need to be prepared if you're going to Kickstarter to start a business. That means, really, although what you want to do is produce a game, you need to be thinking about creating an LLC or incorporating. You're going to need to build a website, a brand, etc. You need to be prepared for the long haul. Again, your concept might be just a game, but you need to think beyond that because there are so many logistics that are going to need to be handled. So I suggest that B is, if you're not considering pitching your game idea, if you're not ready for this to actually create a business, consider pitching your game idea to an existing publisher. Don't go it alone. It's a lot of work. You'll definitely do more work by crowdfunding than having an established entity take your game idea to the market. Okay? Now, of course, you stand to make more profit if you do it yourself, but you're going to get far less visibility. You're going to get a lot less reach, and it's going to rest on your shoulders of being able to get it in front of the right people. And you're a team of one or a team of two or however many. So you need to really think about that. So when we talk about crowdfunding, I want to identify what crowdfunding is and what it isn't. And I'm going to suggest that we all use the term crowdfunding, but crowdfunding has changed a lot over the last few years as industry giants have gotten into crowdfunding, including Hasbro. Understanding that that's what you're competing against. The biggest names, even in more independent game design, are not really independent anymore, but Fantasy Flight, Cool Mini or not, are putting out $1 million pitches, which will raise, multiply times that, and that's what you're competing against. So you realize that when you go to Kickstarter, it's not like it was many years ago. You're no longer pitching an idea. You have to pitch a product. You can't just go and say, I've got a cool idea and this is how I think it will work. Because it's too much risk on a backer's part, and they're just not really funding ideas anymore, especially if you're talking about a game. I've seen people in video games talk about a concept or maybe a single image or something like that, and that's not ready for Kickstarter. So you really need to have a product that is fully fleshed out, with artwork that is pretty well established, with design concepts, in fact, a complete rule book of how that, and I'm kind of vacillating between video game or board game, but whatever it is, it needs to be fully realized, and people need to understand how that game works and imagine themselves playing it. Cool Made or Not is a multi-million-dollar company that does campaigns for single games that could be over $200 for a single game. And people are sort of conditioned to look for those big box or multi-box games. And that's one of the biggest sellers on Kickstarter. Hasbro crowdfunded the re-release of Hero Quest, which was a very popular 80s board game, miniature-based board game, adventure dungeon crawl. They're now doing the new Marvel line for X-Men and Sentinels or something like that with big, massive blacklist or something. I'm not sure what they've got. Mountains of plastic. Businesses are doing pre-sales to an existing market. That's basically what you're competing against in this kind of market, where they know they're an established brand, and they are selling an item and basically trying to say how much of the market is interested in this, including Hasbro. And they have plenty of money to produce a game and put it on shelves. Instead, what they're doing is saying, let's see how many pre-sales we can get first, so that we order that many plus, and we can multiply that out. And so that's the way they're using it. For the indie publisher, which is you or I, crowdfunding is actually about crowd raising. Meaning, the way we need to look at Kickstarter or GameFound or something like that is I want to raise an audience more so than I want to raise the money. Now, the money will come. If you get the audience, the money will come. But the point is, you're looking for getting eyes on your product beyond just simply the eyes in a single room or in your network of friends or whatever circles you run in. You're looking at enlarging that, and Kickstarter will provide that. So it will, and not only will it provide that for 30 days or 21 days or however long your campaign is, but it provides a space on the internet that will remain. So you can look at campaigns from 6 or more years ago. A campaign remains usually at the top of the search engine. People will Google that game later. So realize that what you're doing is you're getting eyes on a product that could be broader than your circle. You're creating awareness for your brand and your product. You're creating hype around what you're offering, and that's a very important part of it. Getting people excited about it before, during, and after your campaign. So that all has to go into it. That's preliminary. We've got through our ABCs, and now we're going to start talking about board game creation or video game creation. I'm going to, drawn from my experience, talk about from a board game, but a lot of these are interchangeable. Now you're ready to consider a game concept. One of the things that's important is to not fear imitation, because most games are derivatives of others. Now, I'm actually going to be giving a talk in a couple of days where I'm going to be discouraging imitation and talk about innovation. But what I mean is when you're first considering your concept, to get the ball rolling, don't let imitation scare you away and say, oh no, there's something wrong with doing that, right? It's easier to move something that's in motion than it is to get something started moving. So when we're talking about getting started, you could even begin with modifying an existing game. That's how I got into game design. Working with existing games, whether it was from Dungeons and Dragons, creating my own source material campaign stuff because I didn't want to use what they had on the market, or other games that give you sandboxes where you can work with different materials. But consider a starting place to get the ball rolling. Remember, that's the starting place, it's not the end place. Existing mechanics work. That's one good thing about it. If they've already been proven to work in a game, work in your game. Try combining different mechanics to create a mashup. Create a prototype. Digital prototypes can be used using Tabletop Simulator, which can save us an awful lot of, glue and scissors and cutouts and modification of decks of cards and things like that. It's really handy. It took off during COVID because everybody was moving to the online space. Tabletop Simulator now, you can put a game and create a prototype on it, and if you've got some stock art and images you can use you get a pretty good feel for what it's going to look like on the table. Physical prototypes should be cheaply created from scavenging materials from existing games, right? You can use whatever is out there. Don't pay for the art in the beginning. You're just trying to get together a concept that works. Don't try to create a final masterpiece. The more final you make it at the start, the less, or I should say, the more resistant you're going to be to want to change it when you should change it. When you get feedback that says, oh, it might work better if you did this. So don't think of it as the final masterpiece at that point. Play test your prototype. Test it well. See if the mechanics work. If this is something that is tight enough that you can go from initial setup to game completion. It's a good idea to do that before you start introducing it to others, otherwise you're going to burn your friends out pretty quickly. So you want to know that this is at least conceptually, pragmatically, it's something that can go from start to finish before you introduce it to your friends or your loved one. Then you play with a trusted friend or loved one. Embrace honest feedback. Because these people care about you, they want you to succeed. So hear what they say and be willing to modify it. Expand your playtesting group to include others. Give it to other people to playtest. There comes a point in time when you feel like you've got a pretty good thing where it makes a lot of sense to just let somebody else who you haven't showed the game to yet try to figure the game out on their own if you've got a good rule book and you see how clear you are in explaining the rules. It's called blind playtesting. That's where you're not present. It's where you learn if others are having a good time. Because if you're sitting down at the table, people are probably going to smile, say they're having a good time, because there you are. But are they having a good time when you're not there? Are they actually having a good time playing the game and not merely indulging your interests? This can be painful, but you're going to learn a lot here. Remember to take feedback and be willing to revise. Your rule book should be something that is pretty airtight when you're ready to go to Kickstarter. When you've gotten the feedback, you're actually able to put that out and give people a really good idea of how that game would play. This will usually happen before blind play testing because you want others to be able to see if it's clear enough in just the rules to answer the questions. Does the rule book make sense on its own without further explanation when you have to sit over their shoulder and qualify every single sentence, right? If you're going to Kickstarter, you need a finished theme and you need finished art. It doesn't mean all your art needs to be finished, but you need to have finished pieces to give people an idea of what it would look like. Very important. You don't have to have the whole thing paid for up front. You need enough to showcase the product. You're going to need box art. You're going to need at least a mock-up of your box so that people can get a sense of what the physical box will look like, general size, depth, dimensions, things like that. You need a finished board. If it's a board game, you absolutely need to have the art and the design for your board. You have to showcase the card art. If you've got card or if you have any manipulatives, you need that all, especially if there's something unique to your game, and it's preferred always if you have unique components. You don't have to have a lot, but to have something memorable, something that people say, oh yeah, that's the game with fill in the blank. Even if everything else is familiar, you have one thing that stands out, and it could just be a manipulative, it could be a custom dice, whatever that is, but something unique that will actually cause people to remember the game. Other unique components, these need to be finished. These need to be fully conceived, and these will highlight your game. Unique features are a big draw, but they should integrate with the theme. So make sure that it's all working together as a cohesive unit, not something that's just tacked on because, oh yeah, I need something that stands out. Your marketing is definitely going to rely very heavily on your artwork. So you really can't cut corners here. You can cut corners in how many pieces of art you have, but you can't cut corners in hiring an artist. And this is where there are upfront fees. It's going to cost something to get art. Unless you're an artist and you can do it yourself. If your friend's an artist, you can't rely on them unless you bring them in as a partner. You just have to consider that. They can buy into it, and now it's a two-person team. You know what? You're going to be much stronger because of that. Or you need to be ready to pay them. That's very important. So you can do that with profit sharing or going into business together. It's always better to do it together rather than trying to do it alone, because you're going to have downtimes and you're going to get discouraged and you're going to want to stop. The art must stand out. Originality, again, is a huge bonus. Thematically, if it's something that people haven't seen before, it's going to stick with them a lot more. Graphic design is another component which is usually different from the illustrator or the artist. So you're going to need a graphic designer who, in most cases, will be a different person, will have a different set of skill sets. They'll have a different ability to, an eye for combining art, working with the art pieces, layout on a board or on a card or on whatever you're using, how it's framed. That's all very important for the aesthetic. In fact, a great graphic designer can work with mediocre art, and they can do a really good job with it. So that's another area where you don't want to cut corners. They can make mediocre art look good. A bad graphic designer could spoil good art. I mean, if they're not doing the layout right, and you have a great, beautiful piece, it's not going to present well. Okay. Graphic designer should have input on your game box and what that looks like, and the presentation, because remember that's a very important part in the marketing. Okay, now we're going to talk about what to do. Now we've got the concept, you've got a game, it works, you've got some art, you're ready to share it. So what to do before your campaign ends? Pre-campaign marketing. I can't tell you how many people I've seen put out some pretty good games on Kickstarter that couldn't get more than a handful of backers. And it's very sad. We were just at Dice Tower West a few months ago, and there were some great games that we were playing from people who said, I went to Kickstarter, I had to pull the campaign after a couple of days. We put the money in, we just did our own limited print run, and here's the game. And there were some pretty good games, they just weren't good campaigns. You can't just put a great page together and hit launch and expect people to find it, because they won't. Again, you're crowd raising, you're trying to raise a crowd, but you need to begin with a crowd. Nothing raises a crowd better than a crowd. So you need a crowd to start with. And that could be your church, your small group. We're part of a home group that also a handful, about half a dozen families, all of whom have a handful of kids. So when our home group gets together, we're 30 people or more, which is great for some of our bigger social production games where we need a lot of people, or we send the kids out of the room and the adults can play a game, we have enough there, or we turn it over to the kids and say, you guys play and see how you like it. So having that group to start with is very important. You need a crowd to begin with before you go to Kickstarter. That will help you draw a crowd. Question?
You said Dice Starter or something, I didn't catch. Dice Tower or something?
The convention you went to, Dice Tower?
Dice Tower, yeah. So the Dice Tower West is in Las Vegas, and there's an east over in Florida. So Dice Tower Network. Okay. So you need to, in the pre-campaign marketing, you need to create a landing page. You need to have a kind of a simple single page that doesn't have anything to click off of or go away from. It just showcases the art. It has the 3D rendering of the box. It has unique description of your game. It highlights your game very simply. It doesn't tell them everything. It just tells them enough to say, ooh, I'm interested, or no, I'm not interested. Okay? If a lot of people are saying, well, I'm not interested, then change some things. Because it's easy to get people interested. I mean, people are going to be interested in just about anything. It's about finding the right crowd. Remember, you're searching for the crowd, but there will be a crowd. You just need to find it. But also, you want to present the idea in a way, and you can tweak this forever. You just keep tweaking it until you say, yeah, I see I'm getting a lot of visitors, but nobody's filling in, nobody's clicking sign up or leaving their email, which is what you want to do with the landing page. You want to simply have a simple explanation, image, and then a field for people to leave their email address. And that's what you're going to use to be able to follow up with them and let them know on the day you launch your campaign. Having that day one crowd is essential. The first time we launched our game, we realized how essential that was. We were excited when at the end of day one, well, not really. We actually kind of knew on the end of day one. When we were at about, 1/3 of the way funded for our campaign, we knew it wasn't going to fund. It's that simple. If you're a third of the way funded, unless you've got some incredible things lined up or something like that, it's the way it works these days so many times is you fund on day one or day two, or you're probably not going to fund. Because asking people to help you get across the finish line is a maybe, and it's one that many times they're going to hold off and say, I'm going to wait and see if it's funded before I jump on board. So getting that day one funding it's really changed the way the crowdfunding works. So you need that landing page to collect the email addresses to notify people the day you launch. On the landing page, you want to show the game box, the table spread, what the game looks like on the table. All of those visuals are important. The field to collect the email, keep it simple. Don't try to do multiple things, and don't provide links away from your page. Okay? All you want to do is collect that. That's it. You want to demo the professional prototype at local game stores and in whatever groups you can, where you can get the physical game in front of people. Now, physical prototype is very challenging, and I realize a lot of people, we had our game manufactured in China. So we did not have China produce our prototypes. We had our prototypes locally printed. They cost us as much as the game retails for now. Okay, it was incredibly prohibitive to try to get them locally printed, Game Crafter or something like that. But you need a physical prototype so that it looks finished. And you're going to need some of those to demo the game before you actually can go to Kickstarter. You're also going to need to get those to reviewers, people who play games, who are influencers on social media or whatever, that they can play the game. Because one of the things that every Kickstarter is going to need is social proof. You're going to need people who have actually played the game, particularly people who are influencers, who can, if Rado runs through or something like that, can say, this game was great, I like this, that, or the other thing. Now that's some social proof, and you need that. So that means you actually need a finished prototype, and you're going to probably spend, some money on those few prototypes, but it's kind of a must-have. They need to show video of what it looks like on the table. Local conventions, the kind of thing that you would take and put it on the table. Joint Facebook groups, I mentioned one earlier, Board Game Design Lab. There's a lot of others. There's crowdfunding nerds. There's a lot of Christian. That's a Christian based group run by a Christian, Andrew Rowan. So there are some really good friendly spaces on the web. It's not all hate and So find some great places where you can exchange ideas, get some feedback. Share images on Instagram when you have those few pieces of art. It's a good place. We were constantly sharing images of our artwork as it came in on Instagram. We didn't do YouTube effectively, but you could do YouTube, create a community on that by simply playing other games, and you could just describe how you like playing other games, and that's kind of an important thing in starting your own brand. I've seen different independent creators create a page, and if you don't have enough material to fill the page, nor enough to attract interest. So consider engaging the kind of games you like to play, or the kind of games that are similar, talking about those games, pictures of you playing those games, You know, and now people who like those games are interacting with you because that's great because your games like those games. But so that's where you want to, you know, involve stuff that's not just your stuff, but other stuff that's adjacent to your stuff. And that means that it will attract people who also like that. So that's one of the things with YouTube. Reddit community has a lot of activity around the game space. There's no advertising there, so Facebook and Instagram, you can advertise. So one of the things about finding a crowd there is you can start targeting advertising when it comes time before your campaign to actually say, I want audiences that look like this because they have responded that they like this kind of stuff. Reddit, you can't do that. You know, so that's one of the advantages of Facebook and Instagram. Tabletop Simulator is a great place to put out links to your games, you've already your prototype, and then as you've evolved it to graphics, better art, so that you've got a good workable prototype on Tabletop Simulator, giving people the ability to play your game there. It's wonderful. Again, they can write reviews. Reviews are very important because, and I'm talking about on Board Game Geek or whatever space where people are actually looking for comments on what the experience was like playing that game. It's very important when you go to Kickstarter. I think when we went to Kickstarter, well, I can't remember the first time, but by the second time we went to Kickstarter, we had about 20 reviews on Board Game Geek, which was very important to have. You know, in fact, I asked every reviewer that we sent a game to, I said, look, we're gonna not only are we gonna pay for the prototype, you know, we're gonna pay what you're gonna pay to actually, or what somebody would pay in the store. You know, in our case, it's $35. It costs us $35 for a prototype. And then we're going to ship it to them, which might be another $15, depending on where we're shipping it. So we're going to pay $50 just to get it in the hands of a reviewer. Now they're going to put a lot of hours into creating YouTube content and getting us some great social proof. I would always ask them for like a quote or something we can use on our Kickstarter page. But the other thing I would always ask them for is, will you please write a review, rate the game on Board Game Geek? And, you know, usually they would. And sometimes, in most cases, in my experience, you know, they're going to be generally favorable. So that's good that they're going to go, you know, they'll be honest, kind of favorable. And honesty is good too. You know, I mean, you don't want a bunch of pens. You know, you want some honest, and of course it shows if they rated other games. So they do a lot to protect, so you can't really game Board Game Geek. Because it's been gamed in the past where like somebody got 20 friends and they made their game #1. And so they put in a lot of things to mitigate against that. So reviewers, influencers are very important. Facebook groups. A lot of times there are some mega groups on Facebook where they're just talking about games that are coming out, YouTube channels. Paid reviews is another thing for some of the big influencers where you could expect it to cost. We were talking about Dice Tower earlier. It could cost hundreds of dollars. Some reviewers could expect to be paid, you know, upwards of $500 just to do a review of the game. So, but you know, they're going to be putting a lot of time into it, doing a lot of video editing. I mean, they're, you know, and they've got so you've got to decide. You obviously can't afford to do a lot of those, but the point is you need to understand these are upfront costs that need to go into before you get your first backer on Kickstarter. You need to consider different language markets. Localization is very costly. If it's more than a rule book, if you need to make any changes to your game, if it is just a rule book, maybe you can just do a PDF. But otherwise, you know, it's probably not a good idea. I found out we didn't do localization for our game, but we wanted as many backers as possible to be able to pledge. So we did international shipping. It costs a lot. It costs a ton. But you know, the good thing is our game is all over the world. The bad thing is it costs us a lot of money to get it there. So that's something, you know, that you really need to decide about. For our next game that we're going to be launching later this year, we're going to make sure we've got a print and play version for international backers, because we're not really planning on shipping to them, or at least not giving them rates on international shipping, which means it's probably going to be prohibitive for them. The shipping is outrageous for them. Email communication. Remember, you collected their emails on your landing page. Okay. You need to collect as many emails as you can and factor off of that email list that you've gathered of hundreds or maybe 1,000 or more names when you're ready to actually go to Kickstarter. The mailing list size will depend on your funding goal. Obviously, the amount of how much you're trying to raise, how much per unit, so how many backers you need. I mean, these things these are very dynamic features that are unique to every single campaign. So you kind of need to have an idea of not so much, I mean, yes, you've got a dollar target, but you need to know how many people do I need in order to reach this dollar target and think of it in terms of that. Good rule of thumb that I've heard repeated many times, and it happened to be true for us. We had just over 300 backers. We had 310 backers. I've heard it said that you don't even break even until you have 300 backers. So you just need to, I mean, obviously every project is different. Some projects you still could make work with 300 backers. Others, I mean, I've seen plenty of projects that are doing locally, or you can do it with 50 or 100. Sometimes you see those kind of things. There's a lot of artificial numbers as well. People who are putting very small funding goals. That was our case. We put a lot of money into it. Not that it was artificial, but it never. What we raised on Kickstarter didn't pay us for our art that we already put in, for the cost in sending stuff to reviewers. Didn't pay us for our time at all. I mean, that was just some cost. That was startup cost for business, which is again why I say, if you're not prepared to go into a business, really consider whether in this current environment, whether crowdfunding is right for you. Okay. So your mailing list, to say when it's enough, your mailing list is it's going to vary based on your funding goal, based on how many people you need. There's sort of a 5% rule that says you can't say, great, I have 300 people on my mailing list, I need 300, I'm ready to go. Probably, it depends on how enthusiastic or how you got those backers, but the rule is expect about 5%, maybe up to 10% of your list to be there on day one. So that's not what you'd like it to be, right? That means on day one, if you have a list of 300, you can expect about 30 backers. So you have to know that. And where 30 backers get you, that won't get you funding. So you probably need maybe 1,000 emails in order to get 100 backers. Now, again, you might need 300 backers. That's okay. If you have 100 backers day one, there's also something you can plan for, where about 40% or so of the money that you're going to raise on Kickstarter will come in on the first 2 days. Maybe even 50% will come in the first 2 days. Depends on how much, depends on the success of the campaign and other things. But the next big bulk will be at the very end. So 40% in the first 2 days, maybe another 30% in the last 2 days. So that means 30% will be raised in the long stretch of the thing. So, sometimes you want to think of what's my campaign goal, what do I need? And set your day one goal accordingly. I mean, that's gating the system, but that's the way Kickstarter works now. So I'll be very specific about our campaign. We needed $8,000. We launched Regency with an $8,000 goal. That wasn't to pay for anything that we paid for. That was just to get those items on a boat delivered to the United States. $8,000. So we had an $8,000 goal. Like I said before, we raised a third of that on the first day and realized we're never going to get there. So, and we didn't. But we didn't quit. We communicated with our backers, let them know what was going on. We tried to show them what kind of a campaign we intended to run. And we communicated with them all the way through the campaign. Thankfully, we didn't really lose a whole lot of backers. You're always going to lose some. But we showed them how we wanted to approach this and showed them that we were in it for a long haul. We weren't just going to pack up and leave. Not to mention there was visibility. for a month, even though it wasn't a successful campaign. We were there, we were able to send people to something, and then we were able to follow up with those people when we finally launched second campaign. And at the end of our campaign, we had about $5,000 pledged from backers, which was short of our $8,000 goal. When we relaunched with a $5,000 goal, meaning if every backer came back and back, we hit it, and then we could have a successful campaign. That's exactly what happened. We funded on day one, and at the end of the campaign, we were over $10,000. So we raised more than the $8,000 that we needed. Okay, so the 5% rule in email, you want to send emails before that first day in order to increase open rate and to ensure that they're going to open it on that day. So they've already kind of identified that this is a safe email address that's sending stuff and they're opening it. You don't want your emails to go into their junk mailbox. You don't want to spam the email. You don't want to send out something that they're going to either, get off, unsubscribe, or anything like that. So, be very judicious about it, but make sure that you are communicating. Otherwise, if you just wait until that first day, it's likely to just go into junk mail. Collecting emails opens other avenues of communication, like inviting them to your Facebook page, doing your group, doing different things like that. So that's why the email is always a good starting place to get them into the network or into the funnel. On Kickstarter, and I've talked about a landing page, I've talked about collecting emails. On Kickstarter, you can create a pre-launch page, which means you create your project in Kickstarter before you're ready to start. Many people will wait until they're going to launch the campaign. There's no need to do that. You could create that pre-launch page a year before you want to launch your campaign. There's no reason why you shouldn't create that Kickstarter pre-launch page, which will ultimately be your Kickstarter page. Create it just as soon as you're ready to create the landing page. It's not searchable, but you have a link where you can send people to it. So it's an important thing to do. Again, roughly the same numbers of percentages. You could, if you've got 300 people following the project, you probably have about 5 to 10% who are going to back. They say I think usually about 7% that will back on the first day. Now, remember, you might get more than that. I know we were very fortunate. We had about 19% of the followers on our game, which is a very big number. 19% of the followers backed the game, that's almost 20%. That's almost 25 followers. That's a very good number. It's also indicative of the fact that we didn't have a lot of followers. We didn't get a lot of eyes. It just means the ones that got there were very likely to back, and they did. We drove a lot of traffic there ourselves. We didn't get any business from Kickstarter. Kickstarter did not, projects we love or anything like that. Our project was just, it was just under the radar. So we actually had about 40% of the traffic that came to our Kickstarter was sent there by us. It wasn't like generated on Kickstarter or something like that. So you needed to be aware of that. But if you've got people following, about 7% will back the first day. And the first day is important. Knowing how many you can count on the first day. About 5%, roughly 7% of your emails. Almost the same number on notifying at launch. Sometimes those will be the same people, so you want to account for that. But the good thing is, between the email list and between the notifying me on launch, backers who are following the project, you can actually have a pretty good idea. You may not like the number, but you can have a pretty good idea of how many day one backers you'll have. And that's the number that's really important, is how many day one backers you have. If you can get to about 80%, inertia will carry the rest of the way. But if you can't get within that range, you can fund day two, but at that point, attrition will set in. So if you haven't funded, that's why I said 80% will get you the rest. The inertia will carry it. But by day two, if you're not funded, it'll stall out very quickly. And this is a hard part. It isn't talked about much. Very quickly, that number starts to shrink. backers will pull out, attrition sets in, and people say, no, not funded, I want to redirect my money to another campaign. Even though it can still fund a week later, it doesn't matter. That starts happening. People see that happening. Next time they refresh the page, the dollar sign, which we like to see grow, moves backwards, and it, you know, it's just, it's not good no job, right? So, how much should your game be? Sort of conventional rule of thumb on that is you should set your unit cost for your game 6 times the landing cost, which means what it costs to manufacture and get it here. It should be roughly 6 times that. So that means if the game's going to be $35, it's probably going to cost about $7 to get it here. You know, you need to think that way and have that multiplier built in. Also, you need to consider, you can't simply do that. Sometimes that puts you outside of the range. You know, you say, wow, seven times it's going to cost me $10 to get the game here, and I can't charge, you know, $60 for this or more. It just depends on what the game is. You have to look at what else is out there and make sure it's competitively priced, because people, that's what they're looking at. How does this compare to other games? I mean, is this a good price? And set the funding goal, as I said earlier, accordingly, meaning knowing not just the dollar amount, but what does that break down to in backers? So how many backers do I need? And you need a lot more backers on a $30 game than you need on a $50 game, you know, in order to reach a certain goal, which is why you need to be thinking about crowd raising. It needs to be high enough that you can, the amount that you set for that day one. A lower amount, if you were to set a sort of artificially low amount, it'll get you funded on day one, which could be helpful for the overall success of the game. But at the same time, you need to make sure that it's not less than half of what you want to end up getting at the very end, if you're going for day one. Because if it funds, now you're responsible for it. And you know, you don't want to be losing money. So you need to be very responsible with the goals that you're setting. But something you need to think about that goes beyond this is what you can do in a pledge manager. How you can continue to collect pledges and grow a crowd beyond the campaign. One of the best things I mentioned earlier about launching a project on Kickstarter is it stays out there. So people will continue to see it long after the campaign is ended. And then the little button there, I just changed this button now because the pledge manager's over, but it used to say, click here to late pledge. And you could continue, we raised about another $5,000 in the pledge manager, which is how much our original campaign goal was. So you're going to continue to get backers after the initial campaign. So be aware of that, and in fact, it's just one of the reasons why it's essential to have a pledge manager. Of course, the other important factor is collecting shipping. It's very wise, especially right now with the volatility of shipping, that you collect shipping outside of the campaign and don't roll shipping into the pledge. You know, we've seen this, we've seen companies do it. If you can do it quickly, and if they know what they're working with, they know what it takes to get a container across the ocean, they can bake the shipping cost into the pledge amount. If it's a large enough pledge amount, that works. Otherwise, people feel like I don't want to pay $50 for this game, but they'll pay $35 for the game, and then they'll pay $15 for shipping. Incrementally, you know. So you need to think about that. Collecting shipping in the pledge manager is very good. It's your friend. Plan stretch goals. These days, some people occasionally will go to Kickstarter and say, we've just thrown everything into the pledge, so there it is, there's no stretch goals. That works to some moderate success, but really, there's a reason why most successful campaigns, they're all doing stretch goals. Because you want to continue enthusiasm throughout the campaign. That means there needs to be excitement, unlocking over the long stretch between the first window of 2 days and the last window of 2 days. So you want to have stretch goals pre-planned. You cannot, once you start getting the campaign going, start thinking, ooh, maybe I'll add this, ooh, maybe I'll add that. Because you will get yourself into a lot of trouble. You will overpromise, underdeliver. There should be no new surprises to you during the campaign, but a lot of surprises to the backers, right? So you're releasing the pre-planned stretch goals as over the duration of the campaign, which means you just need to know how long the campaign is and what you're going to have planned as you go. Okay. So that takes us all the way to the campaign. This is actually the easy part now. Okay, you launch your campaign on the pre-planned day. When you were going to launch it, you announced it. You announced the dates coming on social media. You sent out the emails. Tuesdays are usually considered the best time to do that. Tuesdays are a good day to launch. Thursdays are considered second best. You want to pay attention if there are big campaigns that are coming out. You don't want to compete with a big campaign that's gonna just steamroll over you. But you want to make sure that what you have is your audience ready to be there on that preset day that you've been announcing all along. And you, as much as you can, engage people on the very Kickstarter page when you launch it so that you're building up comments. And if anybody asks questions, respond to them, get the community going. It's important that the comments are publicly responded to when people see that there's activity. Your first update at the end of day one should be, thank you, we funded on day one. That should be your very first update. After that, you're running your campaign. This is pretty much autopilot from this point on. You've already scheduled your updates. You're releasing the things that you've already talked about. Hopefully, you've planned things like interviews or social media activity. You're putting out reviews. You're putting them on social media. You're putting them as announcements in the updates. One of the things that I did, and I think is very important, send personal messages to backers. Every single backer, that when I got a message from somebody back, I sent them a message and said, thank you for backing. And, you know, it makes a difference. It personalizes it. So I encourage you to do that. Share your successes. Announce what's going on, what's to come next. And at this point, once you've funded, you're ready to start paying for advertising. If you haven't funded, it's probably not a good idea at all to pay for advertising. Other than that, you announce it all the way through to the end, celebrate the success at the end, thank everybody, be very grateful because, you know, they got you there, they did it. Make sure to detail what came out and all the stretch goals and everything like that at the very end so they know everything that's included in the package and, you know, announce everything that came out. It's also a good reason why at the very end spikes a lot new backers because everything has been released by that point and it's hopefully changed since it first came out. So more people will jump on. That's important. Finally, I'll just say, ending your campaign, as I said, you get to adjust the Kickstarter page, so be aware to put the buttons and direct links to your website, but you can't actually adjust the Kickstarter page itself. So the minute the campaign ends, everything is locked. So if there's anything you want to change in the page, do it before the campaign ends because it becomes fixed. And if you see a message on there, like if you missed our campaign or something like that, they had to put that in there before the campaign ended. So you just need to be aware of that. You're going to want to provide regular updates to your backers. Notify your backers of campaign updates afterwards. We did it every single month. We communicated to them from the month we funded until this month. The last update was July, saying everything's sent out. Everybody has it, with the exception of a few people. And that's it. So, you know, it's important that you maintain good communication. People are looking for that high level of communication. They shell money out. They haven't seen anything yet other than your communication. So maintaining that integrity with their money that they've invested is so important, and they deserve that level of communication. So just to sum up, crowdfunding is a great way to kickstart a company. But as seen above, it's also what worked. It should also be made clear that doing it wrong is a great way to end your company before it even gets off. Statistics show that 1 in 10 fully funded projects, of the projects that fund on Kickstarter, never ship rewards to backers. Okay? So only 90% of the ones that are actually funded are actually fulfilling the commitment. Do not be one of those statistics. Have integrity. Be a success story. I thank you for your attention and your time. We covered a lot, and I'm sure there's still a lot of questions that came up during the presentation, so I'm going to invite you again to stop by our booth, say hello. My wife Amy and I are going to be there. We'd love to connect with you personally to share more about our experience, kickstarting our game Regency, and we'd be happy to show it to you at the meeting table or just share this book with you. I want to go home with it, but I don't care what happens with it between now and Saturday, so feel free to look through it, and thank you for your time.